Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk about purpose, many people think it's something we choose, like picking a career or selecting a path off a menu. But purpose isn't something we wake up one day and decide. It's not a title, a role, or a job description. Purpose is discovered. It's something already written deep within us, waiting to be uncovered. The man who helped others fulfill God's purpose understood this. He didn't try to impose his own vision on others. Instead, he became a mirror, reflecting back to people the God-given potential they couldn't yet see in themselves. Purpose is like a seed buried in the soil. It's planted by the Creator, but for it to grow, someone often has to help tend the ground. Some people walk through life unaware there's something extraordinary buried inside of them. They confuse activity with purpose, busyness with meaning. They're chasing success, approval, recognition, but missing the deeper call that's been echoing inside them all along. The man I speak of didn't just live with purpose, he revealed it in others. And in doing so, he gave people the greatest gift they could receive: clarity about who they are and why. He wasn't flashy. He didn't make speeches on big stages or broadcast his mission to the world. What he did was more powerful. He listened, he watched. He noticed the small things in people, the sparks they tried to hide, the quiet dreams they were too afraid to voice. And when the time was right, he asked questions that made them think, that made them pause and reflect. He'd ask things like, "What makes your heart come alive?" Or, "What would you do if you weren't afraid?" And in those questions, doors open. That's because purpose isn't imposed, it's awakened. And sometimes it takes someone who sees what you can't see to wake it up. Think about how many people are walking through life wearing masks, playing roles, following routines, staying in comfort zones, not because they lack talent, but because they never encountered someone who believed enough in them to challenge them, to guide them. That's who this man was. He was trying to make followers. He was trying to help people follow the divine path carved out specifically for them. And what made him different was that he didn't push people into a mold. He wasn't trying to clone himself in others. He knew that everyone's purpose was unique. He had a sense that God's calling was not a one-size-fits-all experience. It was tailor-made for each soul. His gift was helping people uncover that unique design. He believed that God had placed something sacred in every person, a calling, an assignment, a divine fingerprint that set them apart. But he also knew that many people never find it, not because it's hidden from them, but because the noise of life drowns it out. So he became quiet in a noisy world. He created spaces where people could be honest, vulnerable, real. And in those moments of honesty, purpose began to emerge. People would come to him unsure, confused, restless, and they would leave with clarity, not because he told them what to do, but because he helped them hear the whisper of God within. The whisper that had always been there, waiting for their attention, waiting to be heard above the doubt, the fear, the lies. He had no agenda other than obedience. He wasn't interested in building a name for himself. His greatest satisfaction came not from being known, but from helping others become who they were created to be. He understood something powerful, that helping someone find their purpose is a sacred act. It's not about giving advice. It's about calling out destiny. It's about holding up a mirror and saying, "This is who you really are. Don't settle for less." And people listened, not because he was the loudest voice, but because he spoke with truth and compassion. He didn't try to control people. He didn't manipulate. He trusted that if someone truly discovered their God-given purpose, they would step into it with courage. They would become unstoppable. And they did. Some became leaders, some became artists, some became pastors, entrepreneurs, healers, teachers. But it didn't matter what their path looked like. What mattered was that it was theirs. It was true. It was real. And every time one of them stepped into their purpose, they carried forward the legacy of the man who helped them find it. He believed that discovering your purpose was not just for your own fulfillment, but for the fulfillment of others. Because when one person finds their purpose, they light a fire, and that fire spreads. He saw people not just as individuals, but as vessels of impact. He knew that helping one person walk in purpose could change families, communities, even generations. And so he was patient. He planted seeds that didn't bloom for years, but he never stopped believing. He never stopped nurturing. He also understood that discovering your purpose was not a single event. It was a process, a journey. And he walked with people through that journey, through doubts, through failure, through seasons of silence and seasons of breakthrough. He celebrated their wins, but he also stood with them in their waiting. And that's what made him different. He didn't just help people find their calling, he helped them walk in it. And the impact was lasting because the people he helped others. His influence didn't stop with the ones he touched directly. It rippled outward like a stone thrown in water. Each person he helped carried that same spirit of encouragement, of belief, of calling. They became mirrors for others. And so his legacy grew, not in buildings or statues, but in the awakened hearts of those who had once been lost, unsure, afraid. He discovered his own purpose by helping others discover theirs. He found meaning not in achievement, but in alignment, not in applause, but in obedience. He was a servant of purpose, a steward of destiny. And because of that, he changed lives. Quietly, faithfully, powerfully. True leaders build others, not empires. That's a statement that turns the world's definition of leadership upside down. Because for many, leadership is about position, power, prestige. It's about how high you can climb, how much you can control, how many people answer to your name. But the man who helped others fulfill God's purpose lived by a different code. He understood that leadership wasn't about being at the top. It was about lifting others up. He knew that success wasn't measured by what you built for yourself, but by what you built in others. He didn't stand above people. He stood beside them. He didn't bark orders. He asked questions. He wasn't focused on being served. He was focused on serving. His influence wasn't loud, but it was lasting. That's because he didn't invest in structures, systems, or shiny things. He invested in people, in hearts, in callings. And when you invest in that, the return multiplies far beyond what any empire could ever deliver. When you met him, you wouldn't feel like you were standing in the presence of a ruler. You'd feel like you were standing with someone who believed in you, someone who saw something in you that maybe you'd forgotten or had never even known was there. He didn't need to wear titles or chase attention. He understood that the greatest authority doesn't come from a nameplate. It comes from the trust of those you lead. And he earned that trust by showing up, listening, encouraging, guiding. His leadership wasn't about having followers. It was about creating leaders. He didn't hoard wisdom. He shared it. He didn't micromanage. He empowered. He didn't manipulate outcomes. He trusted the process. And because of that, the people he poured into grew. They didn't just become better at what they did. They became better at who they were. They walked taller. They spoke with clarity. They stepped into rooms with confidence, not because they were puffed up, but because they were rooted in something real. He saw leadership as stewardship. He understood that people were not tools to be used, they were treasures to be cultivated. And he never confused influence with control. He didn't lead out of ego, he led out of purpose, out of conviction, out of love. And that's why he was so effective. Because people don't follow perfection, they follow authenticity. They don't respond to titles, they respond to heart. And his heart was all in. There were moments when others tried to elevate him, to put him on a pedestal, to crown him as the visionary, but he never let it go to his head, because he knew that the spotlight could be blinding. And he wasn't interested in shining it on himself. He was constantly redirecting that light to others, saying, look at what's inside you. Look at what God is calling you to. Don't focus on me, focus on who you're becoming. He lived with open hands. He didn't cling to power. He didn't fear replacement. In fact, he celebrated it. He wanted others to go further than he ever could. That was his mission, to raise up people who would carry the torch, not for his legacy, but for the legacy of purpose, the legacy of calling, the legacy of God's vision for their lives. He understood that empires fade, titles pass, buildings crumble. But people carry influence into eternity. People are the mission. People are the point. And so he gave himself to that. Not occasionally, not when it was convenient, but consistently, quietly, day after day. He didn't need applause to keep going. He didn't need recognition to stay faithful. He was anchored in something deeper than ambition. He was anchored in calling. And in a world obsessed with climbing ladders, he was busy building bridges. While others were competing, he was collaborating. While others were protecting their position, he was opening doors. He understood that true leadership isn't about how many serve you, it's about how many you serve. And so he lived with his sleeves rolled up, his ears open, and his heart available. He didn't create followers who were dependent on him. He created leaders who were dependent on God. That was the difference. He wasn't trying to make people in his image. He was pointing them to the one who had already crafted them in his image. And because of that, the people he led didn't just walk away with knowledge. They walked away with identity, with clarity, with courage. And when things got hard, and they did, he didn't shrink back, he leaned in. He knew that leading people through pain was just as important as celebrating with them in success. He didn't flinch when people doubted themselves. He didn't give up when they failed. He stayed, he stood, he spoke truth in love, and he reminded them again and again that they were not defined by their past or their fears, but by their purpose. He believed that the measure of a leader wasn't in how many people knew their name, but in how many people walked into their own name, their own destiny because of them. He didn't want to be remembered for what he did. He wanted to be remembered for what others did because of him. And so he kept sowing into people over and over. He knew that the real fruit of leadership is seen not in your own harvest, but in the harvest of those you've nurtured, challenged, and believed in. He didn't fear being outshined. He wanted to be outshined. He wanted the ones he led to shine so brightly that no one would ever even remember where the fire started. Because that's what selfless leadership looks like. That's what purpose-driven leadership looks like. You don't lead to be seen. You lead to help others see. And he did that not just once, not just for a few, but for many, quietly, powerfully. Service is the gateway to significance. It's a truth that runs contrary to the messages we often hear. In a world where status is celebrated and influence is measured by followers, service can feel small, even invisible. But the man who helped others fulfill God's purpose knew something the world often forgets. Significance doesn't come from being served, but from serving. He didn't serve to be noticed. He didn't serve to gain anything. He served because he understood that when you pour yourself out for others, you step into something eternal. He wasn't after success for himself. He was after transformation in others. He knew that real greatness wasn't about climbing higher. It was about stooping lower. He lived with his hands open, his heart willing, and his eyes focused on the needs around him. He didn't wait for someone to ask for help. He noticed, he anticipated. He showed up before the need was spoken, and in doing so, he reflected something holy. There's a certain kind of strength required to serve. It's not weakness. It's not passivity. It takes humility, yes, but it also takes courage. Courage to put someone else's needs before your own. Courage to sacrifice your time, your resources, your comfort. And he did it not once in a while, but as a lifestyle, because to him service wasn't an act, it was an identity. It wasn't something he added to his day. It was the way he moved through the world. He didn't look for grand platforms. He didn't wait for the spotlight. He understood that some of the most powerful moments happen in the margins, in quiet conversations, in unseen sacrifices, in faithful consistency. He found beauty in the background, joy in the unnoticed, power in the small, because he knew that service, even when it's unseen by men, is always seen by God. He lived by a deeper rhythm. While the world chased after bigger, faster, louder, he walked with purpose, with intention. He didn't measure his impact by numbers. He measured it by hearts. He didn't ask, what's in it for me? He asked, who can I lift today? And that question guided his steps, shaped his days, and defined his legacy. He believed that serving others wasn't just a good thing, it was a divine thing, a holy thing. He knew that when you serve someone, you don't just meet a need, you affirm their worth. You remind them they are seen, loved, valued. And in a world where so many feel invisible, his acts of service were a lifeline. People didn't always remember what he said, but they remembered how he made them feel. Because he showed up when it mattered. He stayed when others walked away. He gave when it cost him. He chose the towel over the title. And in doing so, he left fingerprints on people's souls. He never saw service as beneath him. He didn't believe in hierarchy when it came to love, whether it was a child or a leader, a stranger or a friend. He treated each person with the same level of dignity and attention. Because to him, every person carried the image of God. Every person mattered. And serving them was an act of honor. He had a way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. Not because he flattered them, but because he was fully present. He listened, he leaned in, he asked questions that made people feel understood. And in a world of distractions, that kind of presence is rare, it's healing, it's holy. He didn't serve for applause. In fact, he often turned down recognition, not because he was trying to be humble, but because he genuinely believed the glory didn't belong to him. He wasn't trying to build a brand. He was trying to build people. He wasn't looking to make a name for himself. He was trying to honor the name above all names. And when people thanked him, which they often did, he'd smile, sometimes nod, but he'd always redirect the credit. He'd say things like, I'm just doing what I was made to do, or it's all God. And he meant it. His service came from a deep well of gratitude. He served not out of obligation, but out of overflow. Because he knew what it meant to be served by grace, and he couldn't help but pass that grace on. There were moments he was tired, moments he questioned if it made a difference, but he kept going, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Because he understood that sometimes the greatest impact comes from the things no one sees. The prayers prayed in silence, the meals delivered without fanfare, the encouragement offered at just the right moment. His life was full of interruptions, but he welcomed them because he believed those interruptions were often invitations, opportunities to be the hands and feet of God. He wasn't attached to his own schedule. He was available, and in his availability, he created space for others to encounter love in its purest form. He didn't separate service from leadership, from purpose, from calling. To him, they were all intertwined. He believed you couldn't truly lead if you weren't willing to serve. You couldn't truly fulfill your purpose without pouring into someone else's. And you couldn't find real significance until you stepped out of the spotlight and into someone else's story. And people noticed, not because he made a scene, but because he made a difference. He helped carry burdens, fill gaps, bridge distances. He brought hope into weary places. And not through sermons, but through kindness, through action, through presence. He believed that the highest form of influence wasn't persuasion. It was compassion. It was service. It was giving without expecting anything in return. He understood that the greatest moments in life aren't always the ones where you're being celebrated. They're the ones where you're quietly, faithfully serving someone else's breakthrough, someone else's dream, someone else's healing. That's where the eternal work happens. That's where purpose and power meet. That's where lives are changed. Legacy lives in the lives you lift. That's not just a poetic statement. It's a foundational truth that defined the man who helped others fulfill God's purpose. He didn't leave behind monuments, best-selling books, or headlines. What he left behind were people. People who had been changed because he chose to lift them when life was heavy, to believe in them when they doubted themselves, to walk with them when others turned away. His legacy wasn't built on accolades or applause. It was built one life at a time. He understood something many people overlook, that true impact isn't measured in how many people know your name, but in how many lives are better because you were there. He knew that lifting others wasn't a one-time act. It was a way of life. It wasn't about grand gestures. It was about daily choices, a listening ear, a well-timed word, a simple gesture of encouragement. And over time, those small moments added up. They formed the foundation of a legacy that couldn't be erased because it wasn't written in stone. It was written in hearts. He saw potential in people before they saw it in themselves. While others looked at limitations, he looked at calling. He saw past the flaws, the mistakes, the mess, and he spoke to what was still possible. He didn't just see who people were, he saw who they could become. And more importantly, he treated them according to that vision. His words weren't empty affirmations, they were prophetic declarations, spoken with conviction. He didn't just say, "I believe in you." He proved it with his time, with his attention, with his presence. The people he lifted didn't always look like they needed help. Some wore smiles but carried silent battles. Others looked successful but felt empty. He had a gift for seeing what was hidden, for discerning what others missed. And when he saw someone weighed down by life, by shame, fear, doubt, he didn't judge them. He reached for them. And when he lifted them, he didn't expect anything in return. His motivation was never about creating loyalty or gaining favor. It was about obedience. It was about love. He believed that everyone deserves someone in their corner. He understood how powerful it was to simply know you're not alone, that someone sees you, that someone is willing to stand with you even in your weakest moment. He didn't always have the answers, but he always made space for people to be seen, heard, and valued. He knew that sometimes lifting a life meant simply showing up and staying, being present when it would have been easier to walk away. He wasn't impressed by status or titles. His eyes were drawn to the overlooked, the underestimated, the ones standing in the background, because he knew that greatness often hides in humility. He looked at the quiet ones, the ones wrestling with insecurity, and he called them forward, not with force, but with faith. He'd say things like, "You have something the world needs," or "Don't shrink back from what God has placed in you." And those words stuck. They took root. They gave people permission to step out of hiding and into purpose. He knew that lifting someone up wasn't just about encouragement. it was also about responsibility. He was willing to walk with people through their growth. He didn't disappear when it got messy. He stayed for the process. He celebrated the small wins. He helped people navigate failure, and he never used someone's past against them. He believed that everyone deserved a second chance, a third, a fourth, however many it took. Because he had been lifted once too, and he never forgot what that felt like. He taught people how to lift others too. His life became a model. He didn't just talk about service, he lived it. And in doing so, he multiplied his impact. The ones he lifted went on to lift others. They remembered how it felt to be seen, to be loved without condition, and they carried that same spirit into their own relationships, their own communities. His legacy spread not through loud declarations, but through quiet replication, through people who were changed by his influence and who in turn chose to be that same influence for someone else. He didn't need credit. In fact, most of the lives he impacted never made it into any public story. They weren't shared from platforms or posted online. They were moments tucked away in private, moments that mattered deeply to the ones who experienced them. A conversation that changed someone's direction, a prayer that broke through someone's pain, a reminder that they weren't alone and that God's purpose still stood over their life. What set him apart was his consistency. He didn't wait for perfect moments or ideal conditions. He lifted people in the middle of his own trials, in the middle of his own fatigue, because he understood that legacy isn't something you leave at the end of your life. It's something you build every day, with every decision to care, to notice, to encourage. He didn't think of himself as extraordinary, but what he did with ordinary moments became extraordinary because of the way he used them to elevate someone else. He wasn't loud, but he was present. He didn't demand attention, but he gave it freely. And in a world that often races towards self-promotion, he moved in the opposite direction. He slowed down. He made time. He remembered names. He followed up. And those simple acts built trust. They created safety. They built bridges across differences, across generations. Because when someone lifts you without judgment, you remember it. You carry it with you. And eventually, you pass it on. He understood that at the end of the day, people won't remember every word you say or every goal you achieve, but they will remember how you made them feel, how you helped them rise, how you looked them in the eye when they were struggling and reminded them who they were. That's what lasts. That's what lingers long after you're gone. Legacy isn't about being remembered. It's about leaving something worth remembering, something that lives on in others, something that moves forward one lifted life at a time.